Hi YouTube, it's Kathy and this is my August 2018 reading wrap-up. If you aren't already aware, I do weekly entertainment wrap-ups of everything I read, watch, and listen to, but once a month I do a video of just the books, which is what we're doing now. I'm not gonna lie, the end of this month caught me by kind of surprise, and I'm kind of exhausted by it after doing 3 readathons and some of my not best reading of the year, so I think I need to have a drink while I do this. Not gonna lie, that's what's happening. This is one of those reading months where you need to break out the good Islay Scotch. I don't think I should really have to make this disclaimer, but I of course am over the age of 19. And over the age of 21 for you people who live in America and have a different drinking age. That should get us through 21 books, right? Oh, Scotch, how I've missed you. Okay, I think we can do this now. I'm going to start with the nerdy, hardcore stats and charts and then get into what I read. In August... Fruit fly. Ooh, I can already feel the warmth. Oh. Thank you, Scotch. In August, I read 20 books and DNF'd 1 additional book for a total of 5,124 pages. That takes into account converting audiobook minutes to pages, so 2,052 of those pages were actually 58 hours of audio. The age breakdown for these books was 9 adult books, 9 YA books, 2 kids books, and 1 middle grade book. I read 16 novels, 3 short stories, and 2 novellas. This month I read a little bit of everything, with contemporary and fantasy taking up the majority of the pie, followed by sci-fi, historical fiction, a classic, poetry, and non-fiction. If you adjust for the amount of pages in each genre, contemporary and the one-off categories get bigger instead of fantasy because some of those entries were the kids' books. Most of these books, no surprise, came from the library, but I borrowed and bought some. I read 9 hardcovers, 6 audiobooks, and 6 paperbacks. Most of my books were in the 300 to 399 page range, and the vast majority were published this year or last year. Most of these books were by female authors, and there was an even split of male protagonists and ensemble casts, although female protagonists were the most popular this month. I read books set mostly in the United States and other worlds, but also touched on Canada and the United Kingdom. In terms of diversity, these books touched on race, feminism, disabilities, mental health, and queer content, but a large selection of them had no diversity to speak of. In terms of star ratings, this month I read 1 1-star book, 3 3-star books, 3 3.5-star books, 5 4-star books, 5 4.5-star books, and 4 5-star books. Let's start with the lowest rated read and work our way to the highest, shall we? My 1-star read this month was of course my DNF, which was Billy Budd by Herman Melville. This classic tale is only 88 pages long, but I lasted 18 pages before I decided I needed to move on with my life. In fact, rather than completing this book, I created a whole video about how I don't care for classics, and that's okay, and you can of course go watch it if you like. On to my 3-star reads, the first one being Iron Hands. This one is a Grimm's fairy tale that was adapted into a picture book for children about this big scary man that lives in the woods and eats people, and he gets captured by the king's men, but the prince lets him go. Since the prince lets him go, he kind of basically grants him some wishes, but the prince also has to run away from his kingdom, learn some life lessons, and then still ends up with a princess. Not something I would normally pick up, but I picked it up for Fantasy Fest to fulfill the short story component. My next 3-star read was Artemis by Andy Weir. Yeah, this was not very good. I mean, obviously I gave it 3 stars, so it was readable, it was okay. But where this really fell down was Weir's ability to write a female protagonist that I didn't want to just punch in the face. It wasn't even so much that I wanted to punch her in the face, I just felt like all the dudes around her treated her super poorly for absolutely no reason, and she never seemed to care about that. And sure, there can be characters with tough skins that don't necessarily care about the ribbing that they'll receive in a male-dominated society. I guess it's probably a male-dominated society, I don't know. But it was just a bit much and I did not really care for it. This is one of those rare moments where I wish I had Audible, but I don't actually want to pay for audiobooks because I get them all for free from the library. But if I did have Audible, I would get this book because it is narrated by Rosario Dawson and I like her, and she might have been able to bring some personality to this very lackluster character. But I'll never know. My other 3-star read was Odd and the Frost Giants by Neil Gaiman. This one I got in a beautifully illustrated edition. All the illustrations were done with gold foiling by Chris Riddle. It was very, very nice. The story was This is another kid's story and it follows Odd, who is a Viking. His mom is from Scotland, his dad was a Viking, and we just kind of gloss over the fact that most of the people that came from Scotland and were made to be wives of Vikings didn't really like it all that much. That kind of made me uncomfortable, but whatever. This is basically the kid version of Norse mythology by Neil Gaiman, which was pretty good and pretty entertaining, and this is kind of for a lower level of reading. I read this one for my local Nerdfighter book club because we have a tradition of reading a Gaiman book every August because we started with a Gaiman book in August when we started 2 or 3 years ago. Moving on to 3.5-star reads, and speaking of book clubs, I read the next next one for the Booknet Fest reads, and that was Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. This one had it. Fruit fly. This one had interesting world building and a fun plot, but the point of view characters were really weirdly done. Instead of breaking it up into different chapters that have different perspectives, or even telling you at the beginning of each section who the perspective character is, it just didn't. And for the longest time through the book, I thought we were just going to have 2 characters, and then 3 pages into this new section I went, I guess this isn't one of those characters because, oh yeah, wait, no, this is a completely different character that we hadn't known before. And then more than halfway through the book, you get more characters that have like a section. It made it confusing, it took me out of the narrative a lot, and I would have preferred if it wasn't written that way. But the story itself and the world building was interesting, I'll give it that. Next we have Top 10 by Katie Cotugno. I just recently finished this one actually today as an audiobook, and this one is basically formatted in a top 10 list of the top 10 memories from these 2 people's high school experience. One of them is Gabby, a girl that has panic attacks, and one of them is Ryan, a popular school athlete. They end up being best friends, although he wants it to be something more. And instead of this being a chronological journey for them through high school, it starts at the number 10 memory and works its way up to the number 1 memory. I actually really enjoyed this format, although for the first couple of chapters, like between chapter 10 and chapter 8, I was wondering if we were maybe doing alternative timelines or not, but no, it's all one timeline. It's just jumbled about, which I kind of really liked. Again, my memorization of the ridiculous way that Americans decide what to call their grades came in handy, but I'll rant a little bit more about that when we get to another book. My last 3.5-star read was The Rules of Magic by Alice Hoffman. This one is the prequel to Practical Magic, which I read sometime last year, although the audiobook that I was listening to was an abridged version of the book, and I didn't realize that until the end, so I probably missed a bunch. In any case, this book spans decades, and it talks about the Owens kids. There's 3 of them, although you only really meet 2 of them when you get to Practical Magic. I enjoyed the writing, I enjoyed the magic, I enjoyed that it was a book about witches, but it didn't go out of its way to be extra creepy and spooky, which is kind of refreshing. I talked about the point that really bothered me a lot in my weekly wrap-up last week, so I won't go into too much detail, but basically at the beginning of the book, there's a relationship between a 14-year-old boy and a woman that's almost 3 times his age, and nobody really bats an eye about it, even though that is definitely statutory rape and predatory behavior. I was really not here for it and really wish it wasn't there because it didn't add anything to the narrative of the book. It was just another event that happened, and I really didn't like that it was there. It felt like it was perpetuating the stereotype that women cannot be predatory, which is just false. So other than that, I enjoyed it. On to 4-star reads, the first one being Spun by Katherine Mackenzie. This is a very short novella that follows Spin by Katherine Mackenzie, which I read years ago, so I highly recommend reading Spin and then reading Spun because you'll get a little bit more out of it, but you can just read Spun on its own. It is a self-contained story. This was one of my reads for the Booktubeathon. I guess I should have mentioned what all of the readathons I did this month were. Let's just do it now, in the middle of the video. Why not? We can. It's my video, I do what I want. So obviously the Booktubeathon went over into the first part of this month. I also participated in the Book Swapathon, which is why I read Rules of Magic, and then I also participated in Fantasy Fest, which was a big fail, but you're not really supposed to be able to win Fantasy Fest, so I'm okay with it. And then in addition to that, I read 3 separate books for different book clubs, so it was just one of those months. Speaking of, my next 4-star read and my next book that I read for the Booknet Fest book club was You Bring the Distant Near. This book followed 3 generations of the same family, so a grandmother, her 2 daughters, and then each of their daughters. And although the family moved around a bit when the daughters were young for their father's job, they do eventually settle in America. However, one of those daughters grows up and goes to live elsewhere, so her daughter has a very different upbringing than her cousin. I'm really not explaining this very well, mostly because I read it at the beginning of this month and also because Scotch. But I think what makes this book interesting is seeing that these people who are so close generation-wise can have vastly different experiences and upbringings, even within the same family. My next 4-star read was Spoonbenders, and this one from the first chapter was almost a hard pass because it starts with a boy kind of creeping on his cousin, which is just not my kink. It turns out that all of the members of this family have psychic abilities, and basically at this point he is just learning his psychic ability, which is tied in with him getting boners, which is super awkward. This one jumps around a lot in perspective, and everyone in the family has a different kind of psychic ability, so it was quite interesting once you got past the squeaky weirdness of that first perspective. The kid himself isn't actually all that creepy. He even knows that it's weird that he's thinking about his cousin, and I was also kind of relieved to find out that it was a cousin by marriage, not a cousin by blood, which made it less weird. This one had all sorts of different intriguing things about it. There was a heist element, there were prophecy elements, there were people just trying to make sure that the family survived, and it kind of jumped back and forth in time between a couple of different generations, so I really ended up enjoying it. My next 4-star read was Well That Escalated Quickly by Francesca Ramsey. This is my nonfiction read of the month, and this one is about her life as an accidental activist on the internet. Being that I was pretty late to the YouTube game, because when YouTube started I was living somewhere where there was no internet, so when I would go to the cyber cafe to talk to my family, I didn't exactly have the time or the money to spend watching cat videos on YouTube and then finding out that it's more than just cat videos. So this book basically filled in a lot of her story for me, because I know that she makes some great content and I know she's gone on to do some really interesting things with her life, but I didn't really know how she got her start. My last 4-star read was Kat and Meg Conquer the World. This one is done in a dual narrative style between Kat and Meg, you might have guessed. And this one, especially as an audiobook, was exhausting to read in the best possible way. Kat's perspective is somebody who has anxiety and panic attacks, and then Meg has ADHD, so you swing from this internal monologue of everything is going terribly and thought spirals to basically jumping around in different thought patterns and not getting too bogged down on one thing until she has these sticking points that she keeps coming back to because they bother her. Kat is new to the school, and Kat and Meg end up being science fair buddies, and Kat takes it very, very seriously, and Meg does not take it very, very seriously, but is very happy to have a new best friend. This is the book where I said that I would talk a little bit more about America's weird way of talking about the grades in high school. As I've said before, I only memorized these terms kind of recently in the grand scheme of my age, because I basically just wanted to know the approximate ages of the characters I was reading. So now I know grade 9 is freshman, grade 10 is sophomore, grade 11 is junior, and grade 12 is senior. Good information to know. They also inexplicably use this for the 4 years of college, which is how you can get so many narratives of somebody being like, oh yes, I'm a sophomore, but they're in grade 10 and the person thinks they're in second year of university, which creates bullshit when you could just be like, I'm in university or I'm in grade 10. I bring this up because Kat starts out talking about how she has to be a freshman twice, because in Ontario high school starts in grade 9 and in Alberta high school starts in grade 10, and she's just recently moved to Alberta. The thing is, we don't use this terminology in Canada, so this really threw me off, and I was just like, why? Why is this language infiltrating? And also grade 10 would be sophomore. So your whole argument doesn't make any sense with the terminology you're using. If you just would say, I am in the youngest grade of my school for 2 years in a row and that sucks, that would make more sense. Cycling back to good things about this book though, because I rant way too much about this book for how much I actually enjoyed it. The author also has panic attacks and anxiety, so those aspects are our own voices. On to my 4.5-star reads. The first one was a reread, and that's Franklin's Flying Bookshop. I read this one for the Fantasy Fest readathon because I needed a book that had a non-human protagonist, and this one is a dragon. This is a picture book written by Jen Campbell, who also has a YouTube channel. If you have kids anywhere around in your life, consider reading this and or sending it to them. I definitely sent this to my niece and nephews. My next 4.5-star read was for the book Swapathon. It was the one where I called my best friend on camera and asked her to recommend a book to me, and she was a really good sport about it, and also lent me a book because she's the best. This one was Blue Bloods. This book is from over a decade ago, so you might have heard of it before. It's about vampires, which I feel is definitely not a spoiler, even though you don't really learn that until 100 pages in, because just look at the cover, clearly about vampires. This one was a quick and easy read. It had a mystery element, and it's the start of a series that I think I'm going to have to continue. My next 4.5-star read was Peter Darling. This is a Peter Pan retelling in which Peter is trans, and that's why I've been so excited to read it. I actually got this from my book buddy during the book swapathon, and I received it the night before the last day of the readathon and still managed to read it before the readathon ended. Pretty proud of myself. Although, of course, this one is also very short, so that helped. Peter started his life as Wendy Darling and then ran away to Neverland when he realized that his family was never going to accept that he was a boy. There is then also some romantic tension with Captain James Hook. This wasn't the best written thing I've ever read in my life, but I absolutely adored the concept of it, and this playing with this classic tale that we all know. And since it had such fantastic rep, I just had to give it a higher rating than I probably would have otherwise. My next 4.5-star read was Home Fire. This one won the Bailey's Prize for Women's Fiction, and I literally read this first this month. This was my audiobook during the Booktubeathon. So it's been a little while. Let me check Goodreads. A lot of what I remember from this is being outraged on behalf of the characters, because we're in the perspective of British Muslim characters and they're not being treated well by many people around them. Due to their parents dying in a tragic accident, Isma has been taking care of her younger brother and sister, who are twins, for years, and now that they are of age, she is going back to school. She's going to school in America, so our very first scene is her trying to get through airport security and how much of a hassle that is, just because of who she is. This book then jumps perspectives, and I don't really want to say much else from that, just because it was a treat to understand what was going on as it continued, and the ending had this little grain of ambiguity to it that I just want to talk to other people about, because you can take it in a couple of different ways and theorize as to what that moment meant. My next 4.5-star read was actually the second in a series that I was supposed to read all 4 books this month and just didn't because I got busy and I'm tired, and we've already mentioned that I need scotch to do this. There's fruit flies. Why is this my life? In any case, I'll talk about the first book in the series when I get to the 5-star reads, but for now let's talk about Searching for Dragons. This is the second in the Enchanted Forest Chronicles, and this is just a great series. I'm partway through the 3rd book right now, and I just couldn't get my act in gear to read all 4 before the end of the month. It happens. This one is a continuation of the first one, so there isn't too much I can say about it besides I really, really enjoyed it. This world is very funny, there are puns, there are talking animals. This series is great, but I'll talk more about it when I get to the first book. On to my 5-star reads, I reread Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda by Becky Albertalli for the Booktubeathon because there was that whole book-to-movie adaptation one, and since I already own the book and since I already own the movie, it was just the easiest thing to do because I rely heavily on my library. But sometimes relying on the hold system when you need things in a specific week can be a little bit tough, so I just decided to do the easy route and reread and rewatch something I already knew I loved. I made a more in-depth video about this book and why I love it back in March when a traveling copy made its way to me, so I'll link that video for you. My next 5-star read was The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is written all in poetry and it was stunning. This book is all about a girl who comes from a heavily religious background and she is kind of questioning her place in that religion, and instead of going to confirmation classes would much rather go to a poetry club. It was all about her deciding her personal feelings toward her religion and the questions that she had, and also her interactions with people outside of her religion. And it was a very quick read because, as I said, it was written in poetry. Additionally, at some point I will want to read it as an audiobook because the author narrates it and it's done in a slam poetry format, so I imagine that is incredibly powerful. On to my penultimate 5-star read, that would be Dealing with Dragons. Let's talk about this series a little bit more. This book starts out with a princess who doesn't like the type of things that princesses are supposed to like. She kind of bullies her mentors into teaching her things like fencing and magic instead of things like sewing and patchwork. And when her parents decide it's time to just marry her off and make her somebody else's problem, she runs away to live with dragons. This is also improper because nobody has volunteered to be the princess of a dragon before, but one of the dragons takes her on and she is totally happy in this profession. This series is hilarious, it's feminist, there's so many great characters, there's so many different types of great characters. There's this great witch character that I'm just in love with that lives with all these cats, this magical door in her house so that whatever she wants the doorway to lead to, that's what it leads to. And there are these wizards who are just jerks, and it's just such a great world, and I'm so excited to continue reading the series because I'm currently on the 3rd book. My friend Stephanie, who's in my local book club, lent it to me because she was like, I don't know anyone outside my family who's actually read these. And then I had a friend over at my house and I mentioned that I was reading this series, and her jaw just dropped because when she was little she found the first book and she's read it over and over and over and over again and never gotten her hands on the other books. So I just want them to meet and be friends. Maybe I should orchestrate this. The final book I read this month and the one I enjoyed the most was I Was Born for This by Alice Oseman. This one is another dual narrative between Angel, a recent high school graduate who is Muslim and goes to London to meet an internet friend for the first time so they can go to a concert for their favorite band, The Ark. The other perspective is Jimmy, who is a trans man and one of the 3 members of the ARC. He suffers quite heavily from anxiety and panic attacks. What I love so much about this is it's incredibly humanizing to both fans and artists. Often female fans of musicians are all lumped together as hysterical masses of hormones who just want to sleep with the band members. And sure, there are some people that probably fit that description, but that's not the vast majority of the people who enjoy things. On the flip side of that, you have artists who walk this very fine line of wanting to be grateful and appreciative for the support they receive, but also sometimes it can be incredibly scary depending on what the public is doing. I think by now we often know that the public can view celebrities as not really real people and just things on a billboard or a screen that they can kind of yell at and it's fine. And if the podcast Conversations with People Who Hate Me has taught me anything, it's that when somebody replies to the criticism that people have shouted into the void of the internet, you can have a very productive conversation, but also the person is kind of humbled because they'll immediately be able to understand that they were having a bad day and they were frustrated about a thing that wasn't necessarily about what that celebrity did, said, or who they are. When I found out Alice Oseman was publishing another book, I bought it without even looking at the synopsis, and this just ended up being such a powerful read. If you're at all into fan culture or liking things in general, you will enjoy this book. If you want to hear me talk more about these books, or other books for that matter, the playlist for my weekly entertainment wrap-ups is always linked down in the description below. If you've read any of these, please let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye. I have a feeling that Kathy from editing is going to be very annoyed at that fruit fly.